Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum podcast. My name is Citizen Strife, and this week I'm going into a deep dive of a game I've already covered, that being Ys VIII. I already did a review, and I think it might have been either the first or second game that I even did on my podcast. As usual with my reviews, I tend to be very point by point, get things going, go through them, and I probably discussed this particular topic, but going back and rewatching the footage of the playthrough that I had, this was always something I had in my mind, and it even more so now that like Ys IX and most recently Ys X Nordics came out, was the reasons why Ys VIII is considered kind of the best one of the franchise. And it has a lot to do with the fact that it has so much going for it in terms of a setting, characters, a story, and layering everything together in the into the gameplay with a sense of exploration and progression. The game franchise as a whole tends to be on the quicker side, on the shorter side, 5 to 10 or 15 hours. Most recent ones probably 20 to 30, but you could spend a good 40, 50 some hours doing everything that Ys VIII provides, because it feels like two Ys games all in one, because you have so many competing things with your attention. It felt really strange, especially since it was kind of the first one for the Vita, which wasn't a remake at the time. It was the most recent game at the time because it was released like near the tail end of the Vita line, and then now, they re-released it for the PS4, PS5. But as stated, they've come out with Monstrum Nox, they've come out with Nordics, and those games kind of left me cold in comparison to this, because they always just feel short, or more so that their stories do. And it's because that this one has so much going for it, you can make a game just on one of the things, and even make two Ys games in one. They did that, so it felt like a much larger experience. And I don't think anyone has ever said that like any of the older ones, any of the recent ones, even hold a candle to this. This is kind of their magnum opus, so to speak. And it's not saying that they can't, it's just that there's so much going on here that trying to define it was really hard. So I wanted to focus on why kind of the gameplay aspect, the exploration aspect, why that works so well narratively and gameplay-wise, and why progression seems to make so much sense because of the breadth of things you get to do in what really amounts to a simple game. You go and stab stuff, and you collect stuff, and you go stab stuff, and you do more. But exploration and progression, the best games tend to drip feed what you're doing. And they don't just... in the scope of, say, a dungeon crawler or some other game, you're kind of told, hey, this guy's the big bad, go kill them. I mean, that's fine, but then what? Narratively, you're kind of like, okay, we have the end goal, but do I care about any of the characters? Do I care about any goings on here? Like, I've familiarized myself with Etrian Odyssey, for example, and that is a totally different style of game. I'm aware of that, but for example's sake, Etrian Odyssey is just, we are adventurers. We have a giant labyrinth. We have a couple people that are not in our party, but are kind of like stock other classes that don't exist, but we're guardsmen or whatever, and we fight a bunch of dudes. And then you get dumped a whole thing near the end as like, this is what really happened, and this is why the final boss is off to kill us because we did whatever. You can see where a game like that would be a little on the way until, like, say, Persona Q came along and then added like the social element and the Persona coat of paint, and then you have all these characters and all these stories that you can progress. You're given time with characters to dig into them, and you're invested in their story. And it's like, okay, the Etrian Odyssey feel of the gameplay is now has now been added onto with the Persona Code of Paint and all the characters that we already like and want to be around. So the journey doesn't feel as meh. Ys goes about it in a different way. They slowly peel, different things, they add things as it goes, and you're like, okay, you get this character, you get this thing, and it all kind of boils around to the main hub of Castaway Village. Because the story is, you're on a ship, because of course Adol's on a ship, Dogi's with him, and they get shipwrecked by Oceanus, this giant kraken. And 20 or some people, you see them here and there because you're working guard duty or some shit, but you get shipwrecked. You're on the Isle of Seirin. Everybody knows it is this fuck up place you don't want to be at. Okay, so you have that. You have castaways. You have people you need to save. And that alone could have been a good story. Just getting them off the island would have been enough. But being an Ys game, they had a lot of leeway to do, not the best main story, but enough. And especially since you're adding it to this Castaway thing, you're again layering a second thing. So the first part of the game, the first 2 chapters, are all about, okay, let's go into these areas and go off on this island thing and see what happens. It's not chapter, okay, this chapter introduces this person, this chapter introduces this person. What Ys VIII does is it introduces about 10 or 15 people early enough that you're like, okay, these are all like our side NPCs because Adol's there, or you meet Loxia, you find her, and okay, she's this kind of person, but she's in the party and she does this serviceable thing. Okay, cool. So that's number 2. You find the captain, then you find this person. You go to another area, you find Sahad. You slowly get, people together. Dogi shows up and he introduces the way Castaway Village works, and you're like, okay, now we have quests that we can do, and they're geared towards stuff like making beds and doing cool stuff, and it's like, okay, these are all things you would do for survival's sake. Okay, finding water, finding food, going fishing and finding food. You don't need it for survival's sake because Ys is smart enough not to put in like a hunger or survival meter. It's not the type of game. So it's not as strict as that. But narratively, you kind of understand, okay, these castaways need this to survive. They need this hub village to survive. So you go through a level, you fight a boss, you do a thing. Okay, maybe you get a piece of adventure gear, or you find another castaway. You slowly build this hub for everybody to work and to do things. And then you get a shop, or then you get a person who can run better stuff and get upgrades to armor, accessories, medicine, all this stuff. You can start cooking food and cooking better food. You get recipes out of chests and stuff. You get these like adventuring gear things. Everything starts to build, and that's just the first couple of chapters. So that you get like 10 people and you start building this hub and being like, okay, I can work with these people and gain affection for them and do whatever. Not that I need to, but there's a hidden mechanic where if you help these people out, more so than just getting them to the village, you learn about them, even as NPCs, whether their stories are interesting or not, and then you're like, okay, I've helped them and I've gained affection. And there's that hidden meter where near the end of the game, you can actually get the full true ending. If you hit, I think it's 200. It was like 175 or 200. I forget which. But they track that. You can do stuff like, oh, I just want to go fishing, and I can go fishing. Little thing that I did complain about in the original playthrough was that everybody gets to fish. Like, you have Adol, but if you want to do Loxia or Sahad or whatever, they can fish too and make their own noises and stuff. But I kind of wish that they would have had different characters have different strengths and weaknesses if they were fishing or whatever. That would have been nice. I mean, Sahad is a fisherman. He should be able to do this with no trouble, something like that. But it's a minor quibble in a game that doesn't have too many quibbles. But you're doing this and you're getting characters, and then because you're doing all these dungeons that would seem like, oh, these are main hub dungeons, right? No, they're just, okay, go here to find a castaway. And that's all in chapter 2, pretty much. Chapter 1, chapter 2 is just finding stuff. So you're seeing the scenic areas of the Isle, and then you're going through your forest level, your grassland level, all this stuff. You get a weird jungle area. You get a hollowed out coral forest. You get these other things that occur as you're finding these castaways. In certain levels, you get adventuring gear, and that's where the game progression comes in. The gameplay is influenced by how many castaways you get, because you get these boulders that come up, and they're like, okay, we can clear this if we have X amount of castaways. So not only are your characters added to the pool, you get 24 full castaways, I think. Some are even optional. So if you clear off some of the areas, you can find another one in a different area. One that maybe doesn't even feel optional. Just a hillside somewhere. Has other enemies in it that you haven't found. So you can clear that off. So if you're a completionist, you can do all this like achievement hunting crap, finding a new area. And you can go out of order sometimes. Not too out of order, but enough out of order areas to level up or finding more stuff. Later on, you get to a super high level area that you can level up at. And all of this is not even to say Adol's little dream sequences here and there are giving you these visions of the best character of the game. And the reason this game works so well is Dana. I will call her Dana. I don't care if the game pronounces it Donna. I think they're stupid. Dana is key to the other main storyline, and they don't give you to her right away because you're still in chapter 2, but as you're doing these things, Adol is getting a dream sequence. You're learning about this character that you know is going to be important because she was all in the marketing and whatever, and she's a blue-haired girl, so of course East Games, if it's a blue-haired girl, she's usually important. It's kind of like Fire Emblem with green hair. Don't ask me. It's just a thing that's been a thing. But, not all the time, but more often than not, if they have blue hair, they're the most important character of the game. Anyway, but again, you're getting adventuring gear. So you beat a boss, you either get a castaway or you get these gloves that help you climb these rocks and you go further, climb this ivy stuff. You do that, or you get this glowstone that helps you see darker areas. So you can fight these hidden enemies that are just hidden in the middle of nowhere, or you can go to another area, find another person. You can see where these things are starting to filter together just in chapter 2. Chapter 2 alone would have been probably a good third or even half of a normal East game, just finding people to do things. The hidden enemies, what are known as primordials, these dinosaur-looking things, you can't fight them. But eventually, in a later chapter, you find the way to fight them. So the fact that they're over-leveled and you've been running the fuck away from them, okay, well, they're still hard, but you can beat them now. So that's another layer of something that you add. Then more characters come in. Chapter 3 comes in, and, a character passes away due to a storyline in Chapter 2. They introduced it. It was a fairly weird story. I don't know how effective the Nameless Ripper thing was, to be honest. But Chapter 2 at least gives you some grounding of, okay, these people are either getting hurt or getting killed. Or you're seeing pirates die on this island. So the desperation starts setting in. And, just living on this island is a threat in and of itself. So it starts messing with people. And then every castaway is different. A lot of people like to work towards a goal, and then some are just like, fuck you. Or, in the case of the Nameless Ripper, one of them is a culprit. It's like, which one is it? Something like that. That paranoia sets in. And then you have all this other stuff. Learning the raids. The raid system was introduced, and it kept up for the other 2 games recently, but this is the one where it made sense because you're on this island full of beasts. So every castaway improves your chances of fighting. You get this crafting system that helps you, you're gathering items. And instead of doing it for survival's sake, you're doing it to protect your home or you're doing it to get better weapons so that you can do more things while you're fighting, or getting better armor. So everything that you're doing is filtering in on itself. It's building a thing that's important later on. And that's the key to that early game scenario, because you could have done an Ys game just about the survival aspect, but that's only part of it. As when Chapter 2 and the Nameless Ripper is done, then Chapter 3 happens, and Dana herself finally gets these sequences, and you figure out, okay, is this the past? Is this the present? What is going on here? And Dana's story is one of uncertainty and loss as well. So there's like no real happiness at all. But you learn that, okay, she had her own life on this island, and she was a part of these Eternian people, these Saurian people. And when you hear the name Saurian, you kind of make sense of what she's going through in her storyline, because you'll cut back and forth. They make it so that Dana in the old time does things, now that you control her because she's higher level, you can actually fight as her. You get to experience what she experiences, so that when you go back to using Adol, like, she opens a path for you, or she gets you some stuff that you need later. So that they are making their way to Dana's location in Chapter 3 after going over this mountain. Chapter 4, do it even more. You start doing all these things, and you're learning, like, what is Dana going through? How did her people go extinct? You know, what was her friendships? And that informs later narrative stuff. Because Chapter 5 is when Dana shows up, and that's when the game picks up that storyline even further. You've gotten most of the castaways at this point, so that stuff is still kind of in the back of your mind, but it's no longer the key to it. They start the Dana part of the story, and that's where the rest of the game is. But you've already invested a good 20 some hours or whatever finding things to do, building this storyline, going over, and then she joins the party. But you already know how she interacts and how she does things. But then when you weave back to her original storyline, you use her, and she even has like separate attack types. A normal, a strong attack type, and then a faster attack type. And then she can fight on her own. So if you like doing her storyline, you can do how much of her storyline you want to, because it leads to more narrative understanding and a special boss fight, which is fucking intense, you know, because you're fighting solo against a goddamn fucking dragon, but the dragon is part of the story. So again, you don't have to do it, but you can do it. And you learn, like, okay, Saurians, dinosaurs, primordials, I kind of understand. All right, well, meteors, ice ages, but they do it in, again, the survivalist mechanic. In Chapter 5 and 6, Dana is tasked as this oracle of things, this maiden of the great tree, and people were starting to think that she caused it or couldn't have avoided. She could have avoided disaster. There's always this tinge of depression and loss and sorrow with everything, which is very intense, you know, because there's hope in there too, but it's just like, that's not what this game is going for. Unless, you know, you're these high-end these higher characters, these playable characters, you have hope in you, but everybody else around you is just kind of, well, look at the suffering you've caused, or look at what we couldn't stop and couldn't prevent. This is our fault. And then Chapter 6 happens, and then you start learning about, okay, now we have these big bad things that are, you know, trying to stop us, these higher end things, and you get like a boss rush out there. But one of the characters in Dana's storyline shows back up as kind of the main leader of the party, and it's just like everything is together. And I felt like this in Final Fantasy X, where it seemed like everything meant something, because you're already doing all this stuff. You had already defeated the Kraken. You went through that. You could have just left. But Dana went missing, and the party decided, no, we're going to finish this story for good because she is a friend of ours. They had no reason to do that. They could have just left. But they didn't want you to do that. But chapter 5 and 6 then adds on all of the other unanswered questions. Most of the story beats you probably could have figured out in one way or another, depending on the context clues. But the fact that they give you so much drip feed, and then you're doing again more of the castaway stuff. A lot of it is optional. A couple people who were friends to a couple of the castaways, or a main character, or even a side character in one of the other games shows up as a cameo. It's like they thought of everything. And then you're doing all this again, leading to the final boss rush. But then the affection mechanic comes in. So did you do all the storyline stuff? Did you help these characters out? Did you give them gifts? Did you do all this other stuff for them? And then more adventuring gear on top of that. You just like, okay, now you're fighting undead things, or you're going underwater and you're doing these ghost ship things. There's so much stuff packed to the brim. There's so many different dungeons. There's so many different areas to fight. There's so many different things to learn. And everything, just like that Final Fantasy X example, seems to fit together. Because you don't have to do everything to get the true ending, or face off against Dana's optional boss, because that's like 4 or 5 mini dungeons in of itself. But it's cool stuff to do. They thought of almost every little thing and how to turn and tie everything into the base mechanics. Because the base mechanics of an Ys game are Adol stabs a thing, Adol fights a thing, Adol gets some equipment or he gets some skill. Okay, cool. Well, how do you tie that into the narrative of surviving this harsh environment while still adding all of Dana's story stuff and making it the meat of the second part of the game? So you can see that melding of 2 video games all in one. Because they could have just done one and then done another. But no, they put 2 video games for the price of one. And that is why there's so much here. Nothing seems left to chance. Nothing seems random for the sake of being random, because you can all tie back to one of those 2 things. Being a castaway and getting the fuck off this island, or helping Dana with her story. Everything ends up feeding into everything else, and then Adol leaves as if, onto another adventure. Because in the scope of in the Ys game, Adol just does a thing and leaves. Adol and Dogi just experience a thing and they leave. But this was one of those ones where everything seemed to just feed all of its purposes. Nothing seemed shortchanged. None of the characters seemed to be shortchanged. They got just enough of everybody that you're just like, all right, I like or I don't like these people. Or I know why they're here. They're doing something. They're giving me something narratively, or they're doing something for me in the gameplay sense. There's a reason they exist. There's a reason that I'm going fishing, or I'm collecting all this useless crap, because it's not useless. It's a crafting system to do something for the castaway village, or for my progression as a character, equipment wise, something. There's just a little of everything going on. Or there's a new location to find, there's a new viewpoint, or a new area to look for, new fish to find, new crazy fish to find, new fish to feed to whatever. You get to learn a new skill from this giant fucking ape, just all these things that just doesn't feel like an Ys game, but is. And that's why this is the best one. And I don't think anybody would say otherwise. I mean, you can like all the other ones. I like them. But this is the one that they put the most effort into, and it showed. And I'm glad that talking about it, just even thinking about it again, was just like, this is massive. Is it the biggest scale game ever? No. But it feels like a game where everything matters. And that's the important thing, is you want everything you're doing to matter. And I think this is the best explanation, the best exploration of that, the best expression of that for this franchise. So, again, would I recommend Ys VIII? Absolutely. It's one of the best games of the last decade, and I think it would be, I would still go back to it as a best JRPG ever scenario. It would definitely still be up there. But that'll do it for today. Let me see what we're doing after this, because it's more of the winter 2025 anime stuff. Oh god. Oh my god. Golden Boy on February 22nd. Okay. Persona 5 Strikers. Makeine, Too Many Losing Heroines. Alright. And then, of course, next week I'll have another game to ponder and mull over. But I hope this was a good way to dig back into a game that I'd already played, because I'm going to probably do that with something like Final Fantasy VII or some other side questy stuff, because these are more deeper dives into like the goings on of a game in a specific sense, rather than trying to narrow, like, just through everything a game has to offer. So that'll do it for today, and I'll see you guys next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.